Welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I'm one of the hosts today, AJ Alonso. I've got my illustrious co-host with me, Alex Ellison. How you feeling today, Alex?
Pretty good. I have no complaints so far, but it's only 10 in the morning over here in Seattle, so it could go down pretty
Plenty
quickly
of time
if
to
I'm not
just
careful.
fall off a cliff. That's good mentality to have. You know, you never know what's coming, so you might as well prepare for the worst. Alex, we're not outnumbering the guests today for the first time in quite some time. We're even at 2 apiece. We've got the team from Rake Rewards with us, Drew, Torrey, and Prapanch Madhiraju. Thanks for being here, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into the topic today, something that we've talked about before on our podcast, something that you both talk about, I'm sure, on a daily basis in gamification and broadly speaking, how to use that in the sales development role. Before we dig into the meat of the conversation, let's give the audience an opportunity to learn more about you two. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? What does Rake Rewards do? Just give a brief introduction to who you two are before we kick things off.
Yeah, I can take that. So this is going to give it some nice backstory context. Me and Drew first met as SDRs about 3 years ago now. So just to give you a basis of where the idea stemmed from, it was the both of us being hyper competitive as well as top performers in the role. So the seed of gamification that became the tree that is now Rake Rewards was both of us just throwing together these ad hoc contests and being like, yeah, I have 2 more deals to hit my quarterly quota. And Drew's like, oh shit, I need to pick up the slack. And we would go head to head and compete.
Nice.
And that's kind of where we started thinking about it a little more deeply, right? Are there ways to bring the same intensity, excitement, engagement to push these granular day-to-day activities, which will, level set and increase top line revenue from your sales development team, which is, probably the toughest job within a revenue organization is being an SDR. It's an entry-level role. It takes hustle, grind, a ton of monotony, and a ton of painful no's. For every 100 no's, you're getting 1 or 2 yeses. So it takes a sense of discipline to be successful in the role. And Rake is basically a tool that we built to help enhance the experience for, your SDRs.
Yeah. And going off that, I think, both of our backgrounds being kind of former student athletes, going through kind of the sports world, conjuring up that competitive nature, and then going into the professional world and entering sales where we met in our roles and kind of going back to some of those traits that we used in sports and how do we apply them in our day-to-day roles as sales reps. So we can definitely see kind of that translation of competitor nature, kind of that determination and self-reliability to kind of drive that behavior. So kind of all that stemmed on us, kind of connecting and kind of formalizing this idea.
Cool. What sports did you two play? Different sports, same sport?
Yeah, I was soccer, football is the right way to say it, but for the demographic on the call, I'm going to use the word soccer.
Yeah, I played ice hockey growing up, so.
Very cool. Yeah. So you were able to take it's kind of like a classic, I don't want to say trope, but like trait of a lot of salespeople is they have that competitive background that typically comes from something like sports, any type of competition that you have growing up where you learn what it's like, you said, to be disciplined, to really understand how within sort of a set of confines to succeed and to make something either enjoyable or to just to win. Like all of that kind of culminates in being a successful SDR. So cool that we've got a couple of student athletes on the pod to talk through that. I myself did not participate in varsity athletics in college. I was an ultimate frisbee player. So similar, we had a lot of discipline and actually I think, Alex, we talked about this in like the first ever podcast we did.
Yeah.
But the sort of the value of having that background of club sports in just building up that discipline you need for sales maybe a little bit more so because we had to really grind for any resource available to us. I know, Alex, you had a similar experience.
Yeah, I was gonna say don't belittle our club sports student athlete experience over here. I played rugby. We had like no funding. I had to drive to the game, drive the shuttle to the games. So different kind of experience. But yeah, you definitely learn a lot of the same, like accountability, teamwork, competition, like all those different sort of elements that I'm sure we're gonna dive more into here.
Yeah,
exactly.
So let's paint that broad stroke, right? Alex, you just kind of touched on it, but like broadly speaking, I want to help like define gamification for our audience, really dig into some of the psychology behind why tools like Rake Rewards and other gamification platforms exist, the impact that they have on sales teams, like what you're looking to unlock or tap into within your SDRs by using gamification as a method for that.
Yeah. So just in the simplest way possible without using a ton of jargon so everyone can understand, gamification in its essence is just adding game mechanics into non-game environments in order to motivate and engage users and, depending on the capacity, enhance a customer experience, right? So what we recognized is within an enterprise level sales organization, a small uptick in sales performance individually and on a team level has a considerable impact on the top line revenue when addressed the right way. So gamification as a concept isn't novel. It's not new. The way it's applied is new. It can be applied to different facets, different industries, different roles. So if you want to think of, a very relatable form of gamification, the points you receive on your credit card, right? You're incentivized to swipe your card because you are receiving X amount of bonus points. Social media, right? We have a numerical number of the number of likes, comments, shares, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram. It's just something that's almost subconsciously embedded in our day-to-day activities. We don't often notice it, but if you really get into the weeds of it, that's driving our actions, right? You get pinged with 10 likes on your Instagram, that creates some sort of response, whether internally or externally, you're feeling something. So the way we do it is turning SDR tasks into like pipeline tasks, calling prospects, setting meetings, closing deals into a game essentially, right? And completing these tasks within the framework that we've built often comes with a reward associated with it, which motivates these salespeople to continuously repeat the behaviors to help them succeed. So it's kind of that wheel effect, right? It's like action, target, action, completed action, reward, action, complete, reward. And you have the flexibility to drive desired behaviors based on your company goals, right? Last quarter, I expected my SDRs to make X amount of calls. They fell short 20% of the calls, right? This quarter, I'm going to build a framework where I'm putting a higher emphasis and building that cycle to drive that behavior, get more calls, bridge the gap. So it uses, these features and triggers to change behavior and make behavior rewarding at a high level.
I like the way that you frame that, because there's, I think, an inherent look at gamification and motivation. They kind of go hand in hand, right? Like you said, you're motivating a specific type of behavior based on the parameters you set up with whatever system you've built. And more often than not, people are responding to those, to the rewards in that system because managers think that everyone's rewarded by either the same thing, they're motivated by the same thing. You put a cash prize at the end of it, and it's like, we want you to hit your number. So, and if you do within the certain time frame, you get a $100 Amazon gift card. But the reality of the situation is that A, not everyone's going to be motivated by that in the same way, and B, just blanket telling people to, hit their number. You're not looking to close a specific gap on a specific metric. You're not actually making that big of an impact as if you look at, like you were talking about, Prapanch, specifically incentives tied towards call numbers, and making sure that that's a metric that you can actually change the behavior around in a more sustainable way, rather than like here's a reward, here's a system to get points for that reward, go do it.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
it's like there's like a fine balance of like the motivational psychology and then the visualization of that same process, which goes hand in hand to, enhance those behaviors.
Yeah, and I think additionally, going off that, like the last part of that cycle that Prapanch mentioned, the rewards part, it's kind of twofold where, part of it is sure the gift card or the kind of monetary reward that you're throwing at them to then have them come back and want it again. But also it's that social recognition and being seen as the top guy on the leaderboard, the number one person on the team. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier with the sports analogy, where if you're a guy on a team, you want to be number one, goal scorer or something like that, where it's kind of that intrinsic ego that you're playing into to kind of get those trophies, get those accolades. So it's kind of a two-part reward system.
Yeah, and I think that segues nicely into where AJ, I think, was going a little bit with the different kinds of motivation, because we've talked about this with past guests, I think, AJ, but there's sort of three kinds, right? You have altruistic, which is not all too common to find among SDRs. In my experience, they're really motivated by like making an impact in the world, changing, doing good for good's sake. But the more commonly, and just generally more commonly, it's intrinsic and extrinsic, right? So you have the people, the sort of ego driven ones, that's the intrinsic. There's probably more positive lights to put it in than ego driven, but
sure.
That is one way to phrase it. But yeah, really they want to be seen, they want to be recognized for their accomplishments, versus extrinsic, like they want that prize, they want that money. They probably don't care if anybody sees them doing it, as long as like they get the reward at the end. But I am curious, Drew, because you sort of pointed to it being twofold, like for individuals. Would you say that a lot of people are sort of a mix of both of those in terms of their motivation styles?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, from my personal experience, and I think Prapanch, you could probably relate, I think we were both equally, encouraged and kind of incentivized by both pieces in our own roles as sales reps. I definitely took great pride in being that number one person on the sales team or bringing in the most deals. But at the same time, of course, love the monetary reward of the piece. So I think it is a good mix, but like you said, it depends on the personality and the characteristics of that sales rep.
Yeah, my econ professor always used to say that people respond to incentives. There's no blanket incentive that works for everybody. So you might be more geared towards that monetization level of reward, but you put that same thing in front of someone who could care less and they just want to be number one, you're going to get different results. I think, Alex, when we did talk about this before, you used Tom Brady as an example, and I think that, yes, I live in New England, and yes, I'm a Patriots fan, but like I do think that is a really good example of someone who is so intrinsically motivated that like he doesn't need more money. He doesn't need to win anything else. He's got the most Super Bowls. He's, considered the greatest of all time. The dude wants to win because he just cares about winning. And that's, you build a system around him where that's what incentivizes him to keep coming back, and he'll keep coming back and he'll keep winning. Like you want people like that on your team, but you do also want the people where you can just toss a $100 Amazon gift card out there and they'll work their butts off for it. And you can sort of set those like high-end parameters of like, well, I know you can do it if I put this reward in front of you. Why can't you do that all the time? You start to learn more about your team that way.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess that leads me into a question of, does gamification work for everyone? Like, are there certain groups of people that don't feel motivated by either the typical incentives you put in front of them or just a competition structure in general that you might traditionally see in gamification settings?
I mean, going back to what you said, there's no like blanket approach for every single individual, right? There's a universal question is which managers across industry and leaders across the world are like, how do you motivate your people, right? How do you get them excited to come in every day and go above and beyond what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? I would say it applies to different markets, right? Our solution in specific has seen more success with SDR and BDR teams, which are these entry-level roles, where the tasks at hand are more, granular and repetitive. And those tasks are also, it's not short-term gratification tasks that they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're pounding the stone again and again and again. And it's super easy to get very disheartened, 3 months in or 4 months in, and you're like, I still haven't booked a meeting. Like, what is going on? But what they don't see at first hand is that snowball effect, right? The rotations, the revolutions of putting in that repetitive task. So we're helping kind of build that momentum through, the gamification tool. But that being said, is a 45-year-old or older salesperson who's doing 300-400K deals excited by a video game type point system? Probably not. Probably not. They might, not see that as respectful to the kind of deal sizes they're working with, but there's still an element of gamification in the sense like these are the people who are, fighting for a place in President's Club to go to Aruba, or, getting that trophy saying, for the 4th year in a row, Alex is the #1 account executive at company X. So I would say there is there are give and takes. I think it just works in different capacities based on who you are and what your role is specifically.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Something you said there about the reps and also kind of coming back to this sports analogy has me thinking about team versus individual sports or contests. I know we just talked about it. All 4 of our sports experience are primarily team sports. And the thing I've noticed, the biggest difference there is that there's a layer of and a level of accountability with your teammates or with your coaches or with your managers and fellow SDRs. That isn't there with individual contests. Have you guys run into or noticed any sort of patterns with running team contests through your platform versus individual ones, or sort of what kind of differences those can make?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think there is kind of a good, healthy balance that you need as a leader on a sales organization to kind of drive the competition at an individual level, but also have that kind of overarching team aspect where it's kind of a collaborative effort to work towards a goal. I mean, most revenue organizations have, revenue goals or, deal goals, things like that, where everyone's working towards that collectively. And so, part of the game options on Rake, you can set team targets and basically everyone's rewarded equally if you all reach that, determined goal. So again, it's kind of finding that balance where sure, you're kind of pinging them with some individual things to kind of drive that behavior, but overall you want the team working towards that kind of group goal.
I feel like there's an element there because there's this idea within sales and marketing alignment, just in general, like team alignment, everyone wins when everyone wins, everyone loses when we lose. Like you're all doing it together. I don't know if this comes up all that often, but the idea that you might be breeding some level of toxicity within the team. If, for example, you've got 10 members on the team, you have a team goal that you have to hit, and 7 people are working their butts off, but you fall short because 3 people are dragging you down. Does the high level of competition sort of associated with sales reps in general, or people who are kind of participating in these gamification settings, does that breed a little bit of discontent sometimes within these teams? Like, do you have to, from a leadership side of things, I guess, how do you manage that? I don't want to say inevitable, but a situation like that might come up at some point in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Everything needs balance to it. We don't believe an environment that is intentionally pegging individuals against each other. I think while that does inherently, and most people won't admit it, despite having a gamification or solution, does that exist? I would argue that yes, wherever you stand, your numbers are still visible. So we're not creating anything new about, that competition within your revenue org. We're just enhancing the capabilities and enhancing this form of competition to, help sales leaders build the framework that works for them best. So I guess what I'm trying to say, there has to be, a hand-in-hand approach with appropriate management and coaching. And like Drew quickly touched on, building a competitive but also collaborative environment.
Yeah, it definitely goes towards how the manager is leading the team and kind of identifying if that's the scenario that's going on, and kind of seeing what options they are to kind of mitigate any negative effects from that scenario. So I think, things like them going to those couple of handful of, reps that might be kind of lagging behind, and pulling the team behind, and kind of individually going to them and seeing how they can coach them. And you can use an individual target on the platform itself to kind of drive proper behavior to kind of reduce that gap between the reps. But there's definitely that element. But like Prapanch said, I don't think it's necessarily our platform creating that. I think that scenario already exists inherently in sales organizations. There's always going to be someone kind of lagging behind on the team that needs kind of that encouragement to gain the ground.
Yeah, you kind of just magnify it in some capacity, for good or for bad. It's shedding the light.
Yeah. So I'm sort of curious now that we're talking about the managers, right? The people running these contests. We talked about finding, the motivation style of the rep. Are there any other sort of levers or specific components that a manager should be paying attention to sort of tweak or adjust to get the most out of their SDRs that are in these contests?
Yeah, I think one is from the initial onset. I think as a manager, your first job is first understanding why do I need this solution, right? Which comes to where are we lacking as an SDR organization? What is that gap which we can use gamification to bridge here? A lot of the time, I think what we're hearing most recently, it's like, remote work Salesforce. You're no longer on a sales floor, but you have an SDR who's either in his, studio apartment or parents' house making cold calls, which just realistically is not the same thing. So one is understanding, will a tool like this help me increase engagement across my team? After that, it's how do I structure this framework to get the most out of each individual and the team as a whole? So what is that one behavior we really want to stress on? Does it align with the company's revenue goals, right? Or do we need to change behaviors at the bottom so we can see the difference at the top? And that's essentially going back to my very first point on, an enterprise level or startup level in a revenue org. Those points or those couple percentages of uptick when it comes to an individual or team performance can be the difference between hundreds and thousands to millions in revenue on a top line. So essentially, you need to take a holistic approach to understand why I need this, and then match the company goal as well as your individual team goal to choose the desired behaviors to reward using the system.
I think what I pulled away from that, thinking about this in general, when it comes to like the leadership side of things and knowing what levers to pull and sort of how to correctly set up a framework or a foundation for this, it's that you're rewarding behavior, not numbers. Knowing that like you have reps on your team who are going 100%, 110%, 120% of goal, like obviously you want to reward them, but you want to let them know that they're hitting those numbers because they're doing the behaviors that you're incentivizing through the gamification program. Like if it's, hey, you were at 70% of goal last month and now you're at 110. Yeah. And the big difference we saw is that you made 65 more dials per week on average. We can look at that and go like, there's a clear difference between when you weren't making dials and when you were making dials, and all of a sudden now you're hitting quota. So you're rewarding the behavior of getting in extra dials and showing them like, this is what's directly leading you to the desired outcome. It's a very basic example, and I'm sure you've seen much more complicated and intricate examples of that, but it's just an easy thing to point out where like input was this, output was this. We changed the input through this gamification framework, and now the output looks like this. So we're rewarding that behavior rather than just, hey, congrats on hitting your number.
Yep,
exactly. Yeah, and even the reverse scenario, we can play that game where, maybe 1 month you do run a contest where it is incentivizing more dials, and then you kind of wrap up the month and you notice, hey, my deals are down, or, we're behind on business. So maybe those extra dials weren't moving the needle. And, maybe you're making kind of pointless dials, which does happen. Some people just kind of jack up their call numbers for the sake of the metric. But, maybe then you can get more granular and, get in depth and, okay, what other behaviors can we drive to actually increase the top line? So definitely a good coaching tool, and it definitely increases the visibility of all these kind of granular activities.
Yeah. Quick story about that. I remember many, many years ago when I was an SDR, We had a contest in front of us that gave you, it was essentially just you have a point for every activity that you did. So like dials were worth 1, conversations were 3, booked meetings were 10. I might be simplifying things, but like very basic structure like that. And I just had an afternoon where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to call as many people as I can. And I did. I had like 180 dials in the course of like a handful of hours. And I won the contest because I just called more people than anybody else. But I didn't have any conversations. I left 180 voicemails in that time. And I felt like, hey, you won, right? Like I was technically rewarded for the number of dials that I had, but it didn't make any impact realistically in the short term on my overall quota attainment, on the company's bottom line revenue. Nothing. It was very empty calorie type stuff. Like to your point there, Drew, I think like you have to understand, right, like what things you're doing, what inputs you're putting in that actually make an impact, and what you're doing that isn't, and figuring that out so that you can really hone in on like, hey, if my reps do this particular thing, they put in this many dials, they have this many conversations, they book this many qualified meetings, it leads to X% increase in pipeline revenue. And how do we incentivize that particular behavior?
Exactly. Yeah. And even if there is a scenario where there's someone on Rake, doing kind of what you just kind of laid out, where they're making 180 dials.
Please don't do that, anybody.
and they're trying to game the system. Sure, go right ahead and you might win the contest. But still, as a good manager, you'll identify that and say, okay, sure, maybe Alex or maybe Drew won the contest because they made all these calls, but then they look at all the other metrics and they're falling behind. So they know that, okay, that piece or that element didn't really add up to what we're trying to work towards.
Yeah. So on that note, sort of looking at maybe some of the less good, that's bad wording, but yeah, the less good things that can happen with these contests. Have you ever seen into or run into a situation where maybe it becomes either on one side like toxic, or on the other side like you just lose motivation for maybe overusing it? So any sort of situations where a tool like Rake or similar, or just contests are run to the detriment of the team?
I'm going to address the latter question first. Overuse, I don't believe so. I think overuse is almost a good thing for us, but we haven't necessarily seen people overuse the tool. As far as breeding like a toxic environment goes, I think that touches on what we kind of discussed, right? The tool itself is not going to be enhancing that environment. If at all, that probably may or may not exist within the revenue org prior to that, because again, we build the framework and the tool to enhance visible data, which you already see in your CRM, and offer game options to make it, more fun and exciting. But all in all, there's no specific cases where, I can really put my finger on and be like, this went very badly for this team and, they all hate each other now. That hasn't happened yet. So
yeah.
Give it time. I'm sure there'll be a manager out there who makes the reward for their team like just right, so they're clawing at each other's necks for it.
Yeah. We'll keep you posted when that happens.
I wonder, because you were talking about, I guess like as you're building Rake, you have to think about all of these things, right? Like you guys got a bunch of feedback in terms of like, what incentive systems do I need to put in place? What types of contests work for teams? How do I set something up where they're not clawing at each other's throats to try and win a prize? Is there, going into the process of like building the company and the product, is there something that you thought would be like a total slam dunk and you're like, oh, this is like a really cool contest idea, or like, oh, setting it up in this way I think would really help teams, and then you got feedback and they were like, no, that's not accurate at all? Or like there are things that you uncovered during the, I guess, discovery process of building Rake that allowed you to learn more about gamification overall that someone listening might be able to take away and think about implementing at their company, or like how they structure their contests or spiffs?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as the process went, it's been a very iterative process. So we kind of started without even a product. We started with the landing page, and we just spoke to everyone from HR to sales leaders, to SDRs, to account executives themselves, just to gather data. And I still remember, I think last year, our first actual like iteration of the product was so manually driven that we built what we like to call, a unicorn product in terms of it looks like a fully functioning product, but on the back end, it was, every time we got a data input, me and Drew would be manually plugging in the points at the back just to see how the behavior cycles worked. And that helps for learning early on, right? When are people interacting with the platform and what capacity? There's definitely, we at a point we started struggling with that because we couldn't keep up to the real time point distribution because people were sending it at different times. We also tried, building an outsider team. I think one of our first contests that we rolled out was reps from various organizations competing against each other, which we are again exploring it now with the information we know, and have a global sales competition on the horizon. But in the initial onset, when we tried that for the first time, it was a total mess because we couldn't find a way to standardize, these metrics and KPIs because different companies value different things. So then we're like, okay, we're going all in on teams, in which we recognize they're all going after the same thing. They all have the same day-to-day processes. So we're probably going to have more success here. I think a couple of things that we tweaked was like, initially we would work with reward catalogs to kind of distribute your atypical, gift cards and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But then we really thought about it. It's like, when we present it for the first time, we give the sales leader the option to build their own rewards store catalog, because who knows their reps better than anyone else, the person who's leading them. So if you know that, Drew likes NHL, like he wants to go to see, a game, why don't I incentivize him by putting those tickets up for grabs, if he hits his target or whatnot. So that's something we learned quickly, right? Because if you don't tie the right extrinsic reward with the intrinsic motivation you have, there's kind of a mismatch. So getting that right is also kind of that key balance to making sure your systems are working the right way.
Yeah. I think the only other thing to note that I think we really took away from some of the early tests were, and it's something you just touched on briefly, Prapanch, was kind of the behavior day to day of a sales rep. When are they looking at this data? When are they, inputting things into the CRM? And then naturally, when are they actually updating their points on Rake? And I think that kind of stemmed our idea to have these, automated updates. We create a custom Slack channel for the team. And so any behavior or activity going on in the platform is pinged in the Slack channel. So everyone's kind of up to date and being notified, hey, a new contest went live, or Drew just, waged a bet on calls made against Prapanch for today. Let's see who wins this, this bet. Things like that to kind of, again, just keep top of mind on these sales reps. They have a lot going on. So does the manager. And we learned even contests going on internally where the manager forgets to reward the person at the end of the month because they have so much going on that structuring all of these in a proper way and then implementing it and then rewarding at the end, it takes a lot of time and effort. And so our platform is, hopefully putting that framework in place to make it a lot easier.
Something that you mentioned that got me thinking, Prapanch, you were talking about it, the idea that like who knows their reps better than the managers. And I think that's such a huge missing piece in a lot of what I've seen some gamification settings in terms of like not really understanding what motivates your team. There's I don't know if it's a widely known contest structure, but Colin Waldrop at SalesLoft, who will be a guest on a future piece of Demand Drive content, FYI, he put together a contest called the Silver Bike. And I think it just ties in kind of directly to what you were talking about, where like the contest in place had a $100 prize, but the $100 could be applied towards basically anything. So what he did was he talked to each person on the team and learned about their hobbies, their interests, what they do outside of work, all that stuff, and then asked them like, hey, if I put something up for a contest that would really motivate you, what would that be? And then they would tell him, and he would find something in that realm that was $100 or similar value and make that the reward for their contest. So, Drew, in your case, if it was NHL tickets, but Alex really wanted to go see a Mariners game, it's still $100 worth of tickets, but Drew, if you win, it's to a hockey game, and Alex, if you win, it's to a baseball game. And I think that's such like a missing component of so many different contest structures that people don't look into, where it's like you can just put something up for grabs and people will work for it. But if they have an emotional attachment to it in some capacity, you guys learned this as you built the platform out, it makes somebody work that much harder for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we saw a lot of teams that we spoke with who rewarded their employees with things like, going to lunch with someone on the leadership team, or being able to attend a corporate event or a dinner, something like that. And that kind of goes off the social recognition aspect, because they can then go back and say, hey, I was the top guy on the team, and I'm able to attend this, cool dinner with our CEO or something like that. And so our platform allows the leader to actually implement that type of reward for a contest.
Last thing I want to mention before we start wrapping things up, you were talking about different structures that you had built into the system, like challenging somebody. Something that Alex and I had talked about previously before this episode was the ELAM method. Alex, you brought it up to me. I think at the NBA All-Star game, they put it in place where like you have a certain point threshold rather than a classic sort of time-based basketball game to determine who wins.
Yeah. Do you want more details on that?
Yeah, just like a quick, because I think you guys built this into your platform, right? It's something similar, but yeah.
Yeah. Basically, the way it's called the Elam ending, because some guy named Elam made it up. But basically, when Team A hits a certain point threshold that's predetermined, or it's clock based, it depends, then 7 points above that, or X number of points above that, is the final score. So if Team B is behind by 5, then they need to get 12 points and Team A needs to get 7, and the first one of that point gets there. So it's just a different way. The reason basketball started doing it in the All-Star game is because the teams just never played defense and didn't really care. So it was a way to like keep the game close, even if it's not actually that close. But yeah, would love to hear sort of how you guys have taken that and run with it.
Yeah. You want to take that too?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that plays along what I mentioned earlier, where the wagering feature in the platform, which is kind of twofold, where sales reps can go head to head ad hoc at their own discretion. They can challenge. So for example's sake, I can challenge Prapanch, pick a metric and basically bet a certain amount of points against him. And winner takes all. And then I can go use those points in the rewards catalog. But other than that, you can also challenge people head to head within a contest. So basically, if you're trailing behind and you think you can gain ground on someone, you can actually bet points against them. Same thing, winner takes all, and then you would climb that leaderboard. So I think that also is a feature we built in to help maybe mitigate against some of the negative effects of competitions, where if you're trailing behind and it's going into the last week of the month, you still have a chance to gain ground and see what you can do if you bet those points and risk it. But it's definitely an interesting tool to see the behavior of the sales reps, and each person uses it differently, but it's been super fun to have them kind of go head to head and see how they interact.
Very cool. Well, as I want to wrap the conversation up, thanks so much for being here with us, guys. I guess if you want the audience to remember like one big takeaway from the conversation, one thing about gamification, about maybe setting something like this up at their company, contests, spiffs, whatever, what is like the one you have to know this above anything else from this episode piece of information that you want someone to come away with?
Yeah, I mean, just taking a bigger step back, and then I'll dive into the team level. It's just a lot of competitors in this space, I think, have been around for quite some time, like, founding companies in like 2013, 2011, 2016. So they've been doing some level of gamification. Right now, I think everything is coming to the foreground because it's becoming a tech stack that is being more readily considered by sales org and, SaaS sales team and revenue orgs and whatnot. So just from the sheer growth of the gamification industry as a whole, year over year, it's growing by 27%. So it's like poised to grow, 18 to 19 billion between now and 2026. From the sales performance management out of gamification as a whole, that's again compounding at 13% a year. So roughly $3 billion of growth in the sales gamification market between last year and 2026. So there's going to be a lot of innovation and exciting things coming up in this space. I think it's smart for sales leaders to kind of get ahead of it and explore what works for their team and what doesn't work for their team. And I think getting on a more granular team level to really understand, should I apply this to what we're doing and my team, is just speak to your reps, like ask them, what they love about the job, what they hate about the job. How can we make this more exciting? How can we make this more fun? What makes you tick as an individual? And then using the outline or framework that solutions like us or other companies have built, you can really leverage that data you get from your people to build the best possible solution.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap that point up, now more than ever with the new generation coming up into the workforce and entering sales, Gen Z, they're inherently around video games, they're used to screens, they're used to, this level of gamification already. So it's kind of that level of comfortability for them where it comes naturally and they're used to kind of playing these games. So I think it's just a no-brainer that it's entering the workforce, and it's, increasing now more than ever, especially like we said earlier with, remote work being super prominent now after COVID. I think it is going to be definitely a big time tool of focus for sales org moving forward.
Pretty compelling stuff. It's hard to argue against that. Awesome. Well, hey, Drew, Prapanch, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate the insight, examples from you two. If people want to continue the conversation, learn more about you guys, learn more about Rake, how can they do that?
They can register directly and input their information through our website. Additionally, happy to share our information for individuals, managers, leaders, reps to reach out to us directly as well.
Yeah. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. You can email hello@rakerewards.co as well. We can respond there. But thanks so much for the time. This was great.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks again for being here. Remember to subscribe, to unsubscribe, get more tips and tricks around sales development in your inbox, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks again for being here, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. If you want less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in your inbox, go ahead and check out some of the content we have to the left, and make sure that you subscribe to Unsubscribe to keep your SDR team in tip-top shape.